I'm Joe Lonergan, native of Quebec City. I was born at the Jeffrey Hale in 1947. And with regard to the Chronicle-Telegraph, the odd time it used to appear in my house, and my neighbors would get it. And later on, I suppose, when I was about 10 or 11, I started delivering Chronicle-Telegraphs. I had been delivering Montreal Gazettes, but then I expanded my operation and started delivering Chronicles.
Okay, that's good.
We didn't have a subscription. No, I don't think they could afford a subscription.
Okay.
But every now and then they'd decide to buy a copy, or somebody would give them a copy. Well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, even the Chronicle, even the Gazette, I think when I started delivering was 30 cents a week. So really the Chronicle, I don't know, it was 30 or 35 cents a week. It was a daily. It was not a tabloid. It was a bigger, larger format. I couldn't tell you how many pages, but I guess there was probably 12. And it was what the size you'd expect a newspaper to be. And on the weekend there was a colored section that was, I'd say when, as I'm speaking, that's when if we'd buy the Chronicle, that's when we'd buy the Chronicle. I think it was 10 cents on Saturday, because you'd get the color section and the colored comics, and to get money, of course,
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah, no, kids want money for candy, and later on clothes and wicked things like pinball machines. Well, the first paper run I had with the Gazette gave me $2.10 a week about. So I suppose, I had a route with the Chronicle of about 40 newspapers. So I was probably getting about $4 a week. I'm really guessing, because I don't remember the precise remuneration from the Chronicle. I shouldn't say usually, but a lot of people would give you a nickel, Some people would give you a dime. And if somebody decided to pay a month ahead, you might get a quarter. And Christmas, you'd really get tips, dollars, even $2 sometimes. I delivered newspapers from the time I was about 11, 12 to the time I was 18. So yeah, I'd be getting $12, $14 later on, because I ended up with lots of papers, Chronicles, and like when I was a young teenager, basically I'd buy my own clothes with paper money. And, because Christmas time you'd easily get $100. If you had 140 customers, you'd probably get $120, for sure. You'd have a particular run. You'd have 4 or 5 streets, and everybody who was English-speaking on those streets who decided to subscribe to the Chronicle, you'd deliver. But the Chronicle was not as heavy as the Gazette. It was safer to fold the Gazette in 3 and toss it, and it would sit there. The Chronicle, it was a little, it wasn't that safe to just leave it, because it could easily be taken by the wind.
Oh.
No, so you'd have to be fold it and put it between the edge of the door and the doorknob, or put it in the slit, or between the 2 doors. As you know, in Quebec City, a lot of places have 2 doors. You got onto it. It was would come to about the same as far as delivering a Gazette or the Chronicle. It'd be about the same. The Chronicle was after school. 4:30. I'd deliver the Chronicle. Yeah, it wasn't a morning newspaper. It would come earlier on Saturday because of the colored section. They would come, maybe 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning. But basically, the Gazette was a morning paper, and the Chronicle was an evening paper. And of course, I'm talking about the 1950s, late 1950s, and the 1960s. Occasionally, you'd end up with a paper because they'd send you too many.
Okay.
And occasionally that would happen, or it certainly happened. Surely it couldn't be because I missed a customer. But I guess that's a possibility too, but I don't think so. You have to be careful when you're a newspaper boy, because you sort of get into autopilot, and it's frustrating and worrisome at the end of your run if you find that you have an extra paper or two, because you wonder, did they send me too many, or did I miss a customer? When you started, yeah, you'd get a list, and it was, yeah, it's surprising how hard it is to find some addresses now. You know, in retrospect, when you'd start a run, take over somebody else's run for the summer or something, and you'd try to, it's surprising. Yeah, sometimes it was cold, but sometimes you got to go around with them. Yeah, you're making me think back, and yes, I would do that. You know, I would count the papers, and because you would have to keep track. If you had an extra one, fine, you could take it home and read it. Or I mean, I remember a guy waiting for the bus, and he'd always be trying to buy a newspaper from me, and I would only sell it if I knew I had an extra, you know. No, I'd keep that. If it was an extra, yeah. But I don't recall that happening with the Chronicle. It was only the Gazette. Yeah, every week.
Okay.
You go collecting every week. And like I mentioned before, some would pay by the year.
Okay.
And you may never get to see them. They were mystery people. Or maybe they'd leave you an envelope outside their door at Christmas or something, you know. Or they'd come and give it to you, you know. And I remember the Gazette had some kind of thing that we'd ring the doorbell and give them, you know, like a magazine of some sort after January. Maybe the Chronicle had something similar to that, but I don't recall. I don't think they did. Oh, it would go in the garbage.
Okay.
It would go in the garbage, or then again, some people would put them in their porch, and I remember a particular character in the community would come around with a cart and pick them up in a two-wheel cart, and he'd go off, and I don't know what he did with them, but they must have been recycled. Maybe they ended up as pulp at the Anglo-Canadian pulp. I really don't know. But I do remember a guy coming around collecting old paper. The office of the Chronicle-Telegraph was on the bottom of St. Sacrament Hill when I was delivering, but I never went there.
Okay.
They would come around to us. They would come to our house to collect. Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. Mountain or Mr. Monahan would come around. They'd deliver it by truck.
Okay.
They'd put it on your front gallery, or I suppose if you didn't have a front gallery, there'd be some rendezvous. You'd find, like my Gazettes, I'd find in front of Demursis Pharmacy across from Quebec High School, because it was very early in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you might be there waiting for them too. The Chronicle comes in the mail now.
What
So
about-
to me, the Quebec Chronicle-Telegraph is an institution among the English-speaking population of Quebec City. All the different communities that make up the English-speaking population, whether they're the Anglican community, St. Patrick's Parish, the Presbyterians, the Greeks, the Jewish people, the Irish, the Scots, they all had their little organizations, and you could track all their little activities through the 1950s and 60s, and other kind of activities where all English-speaking people would get together, or not so much get together, but I mean they'd all be interested in, like the arrival of an American battleship down at the port, and be in the Chronicle-Telegraph. The movies in English would all be advertised in the Chronicle-Telegraph, and it was always there, and that's where you'd read the local news. You could read international news in it at the time. That's why it's so different. Well, it was a regular newspaper, like in the 1950s and 1960s. You'd find the international news on the front page, and probably spilling over onto the second, maybe. That'd probably be about it. Maybe, I forget how maybe they put some stuff on the back page, I don't know. But it was international, you know, national news, Canadian news, and Quebec, province of Quebec, and international. And that's not the case anymore. It's changed, and obviously if a businessman or a businesswoman wants to get a newspaper, they might buy the Soleil if they want to, or the Le Devoir if they want to get intellectual discussions of current issues in the world, or the province of Quebec, or Canada. You're not going to find that in the Chronicle-Telegraph now, as a rule. Basically, it's devoted to reporting on community events of the different communities who speak English. Obviously, at the time, it made the shift. It was, I'd say, the community would have felt it, that it was a come down. It's not surprising, because percentage-wise, the English-speaking community has continually been on the decline, you know, and that was a reflection of the diminution of English-speaking population, percentage-wise, in the greater Quebec City area. So they felt, you know, English-speaking people felt that their impact on the community was, on the greater community, the Quebec community, was diminishing, and the diminishing of their newspaper was a reflection of that. So I'm sure they felt it. They marked and they commented to themselves, "Oh, isn't it terrible? It's a sad reflection of our." But I may have been out of town, because I left in 1970, and for a year, to get my Bachelor of Education in Halifax, and then I went back down there in 73, 74, 75 to get my Master's in History. So I may have missed the actual transition.
Okay.
If I was here, I don't remember, you know, I don't have a firm memory of it happening. Well, I guess if I was king, that's a hard question, Bethann. I guess it would have international and national news, and it would have news on Montreal, and there would be a few pages on Quebec City scene, you know. I mean, it's kind of pretentious to pretend that if I were king and things were exactly as they are now, we're going to have a 52-page newspaper daily. I can't give you the precise statistics he was quoting to me about, generally speaking, about the diminishing of the English-speaking population in Quebec, and how the demographic has changed. So many of the English-speaking people of today are from away, like yourself, and like yourself, because there's two ladies in front of me, and so many of the people I know are from away, whereas there's other English-speaking people who have been here for generations, and maybe a person who just arrived here 2 years ago would say, "Oh," and you said, you know, the Chronicle-Telegraph has ceased to publish. And they'd say, "What? The Chronicle-Telegraph? What was that?" You know, if they hadn't read it. Whereas for a person whose family had been in the Quebec City area for 2 or 3 generations, and say, oh, that's a shame, you know. Well, for me, I guess there's sentimentality. I don't think it would be a case of, oh my God, this is an indication that the English-speaking people of Quebec are finished. You know, it's just a question of time before we're all speaking French, and maybe we'll even have to change our names. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know. To me, there's a serious, you know, I don't consider myself a pessimist or an optimist. I consider myself a realist. And I think when you use the word community, I think among the English-speaking people there are a community of communities, because in one sense we are a community, we're English-speaking people, but among the English-speaking people there are different groupings. And there's newcomers, there's old-timers, if you want to call them that. There's Irish people, there's Jewish people, Scottish people, English people. They all have their places where they go and worship. And the population has diminished greatly. And the population is aging, apart from the newcomers, because often you have young people coming in here and having babies, and that's great. And they integrate well, or they don't integrate well. But as far as the old community is concerned, it's a fabric where thread by thread it's getting bare. For a kid, when I was small, like reading Ripley's Believe It or Not was cool, you know? Whereas now it's, you know, poor kid. He got off on that, you know? One thing sticks in my mind, reading about, I don't know what they are. I forget the term. There's some kind of sect in India that are so careful about living things that the women wear veils, or maybe the men too, so they don't breathe in little insects and kill them. And you know, that's one of the things. Or they'd be some outlandish thing. I don't know, about Yetis or something that later on you'd realize it's. Believe it or not, this one's a knot for sure. You know. But some of them were, you know, just surprising, amazing, and you know. Did you know that an elephant lived for 80 years or something like that? You know.